Good evening, everyone. Jen, do you mind sharing from the page Evolution of Modern Urban Planning Models? Oh, yes. Jumel, do you mind uh saying our opening prayer?
Hello po.
Oo, pwedeng mag-lead ka ng prayer natin for tonight. Thank you.
Okay po. Ah, Ama na sa langit, Diyos na dakila sa lahat. Sa ngalan po ng aming tagapagligtas na sa Yesu Kristo, kami po ay nagkakatipon upang maunawaan po namin ang aming layo ng makapag-review para po sa environmental planning board exam. Humihingi po kami sa inyo ng gabay at talino upang maunawaan po namin ang mga ituturo po sa amin ng aming ah, guro. Maraming po salamat, Ama, sa mga biyayang pinagkaloob niyo po sa amin at sa mga bagay na hindi na po namin nalalaman. Umaasa po kami dahil po kayo po ang may makapangyarihan sa lahat. Lahat ng pong ito ay idinadalangin po namin sa ngalan po ng aming pagkapagligtas. Amen.
Amen. Father, Son, and Spirit. Thank you, Jumel. Jen, pa-share na lang, pa-share screen. So for tonight, we are already on this part, which is the modern urban planning models. So let's do that. Um, so again, good evening, everyone. We'll try to explore one of the most fascinating aspects of urban planning, the evolution of modern planning models. Now, you may wonder why this evolution is so important. Well, consider this that cities are living, they are breathing organisms. So they change, they grow, and sometimes they struggle under the weight of their own development. So the way we plan them reflects not only our aspirations but also the challenges we face as societies. So urban planning as a discipline has been shaped by technological advancement, cultural shifts, and political ideologies, from the grid patterns of ancient cities to the sprawling metropolises of today. Planning models have evolved to address issues like transportation, housing, public spaces, and sustainability, among others. So tonight, we'll look at how various planning models emerge in response to the needs of their time, from the industrial age to the rise of the modern city. So we try to understand that, and we can go to the next slide. Okay, so that's the in the US context, um conservation and parks movement. Let's take a moment to appreciate the profound influence Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. Has had on the shaping of American cities. Uh, he was born in 1822. Olmsted is often referred to as the father of American landscape architecture. His vision extended beyond mere aesthetics. He saw parks as essential elements in fostering a sense of community, mitigating social issues, and enhancing the well-being of city dwellers. His work is tied to the conservation and parks movement, which was a broader initiative that emerged in the 19th century, along with along with other visionaries like George Perkins Marsh, John Muir, Gifford Pinchot, and even U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Olmsted played a key role in establishing a system of parks that would span across America. So this movement wasn't just about creating beautiful places. It was about connecting people with nature and making urban life more bearable in an increasingly industrialized world. So in 1870, Olmsted authored a landmark book entitled Public Parks and the Enlargement of Towns. Please remember that book, which was a comprehensive take on why parks mattered and his belief in the importance of parks was pretty clear. He did not see parks as just decorative spaces, but as integral parts of a city's fabric. In his words, parks were meant to serve the social, economic, and cultural well-being of citizens. So he had several vision. He believed parks should cater to multiple needs, not just recreational, but also social, cultural, and economic. Okay, I mentioned that. And also, Olmsted saw parks as places where social class differences could dissolve. Um, Meaning a green space he felt allowed rich and poor to coexist in a shared experience, easing social tensions. According to Olmsted also, parks were places for family bonding, spiritual reflection, and gatherings that fostered moral and religious values. So, he believed parks could be tools for social change, helping reform troubled urban areas by providing cleaner, safer environments. So Olmsted's work was also heavily influenced by the Beaux Arts movement. This architectural style emphasized grandeur, drama, and symmetry. These are all elements that can be seen in many of the parks he designed. If you've ever, for example, if you have been to New York, especially particularly the Central Park in New York or the Emerald necklace in Boston, so you can experience the lasting impact of this approach, was a sense of cohesion, scale, and beauty that elevates the human experience. So Frederick Law Olmsted wasn't just designing parks, he was designing cities with a future in mind where the environment plays a crucial role in public life. So his ideas influenced generations of planners who followed, and his legacy still shapes our thinking about the role of green spaces in urban environment today. So let's go to the next slide. Um, Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. was a visionary. And some of his famous contributions to urban planning are parks that continue to define American cities today. One of his most renowned um, projects is Central Park in New York, designed in collaboration with architect Calvert Vaux under what is called the Greensward Plan. Okay, so um Central Park is a masterpiece indeed in creating a natural, serene space amid the bustling metropolis of New York City. Its winding paths, scenic landscapes, and large open spaces create a much needed escape for city dwellers. But, Central Park was just the beginning. Olmsted went on to design other significant landscapes such as Riverside, Illinois, which he planned as one of the first planned communities in the US, emphasizing curvilinear streets and large public green spaces. Also, he designed the Buffalo, New York park system, which was a network of connected parks, was innovative for its time during that time, allowing people to travel between green spaces without leaving the beauty of the park system. And then the Druid Hills in Georgia, which was a suburban community. It was designed to create harmony between the built environment and the natural world. So um, another major project was Boston's Emerald Necklace, which I mentioned early on, was a series of link parks. That's why it's called necklace, because it was a series of link parks that not only provided beautiful spaces for the city, but also served functional purposes like flood control. So Olmsted believed that parks should serve multitude roles in urban life, not just offering recreation, but solving practical problems. So these spaces are enduring examples of Olmsted's philosophy that urban parks are essential to creating healthy, vibrant cities. So we can go to the next page. Okay. Mm. So this is the context now is in the UK. Okay. That the 19th century was a time of great transformation due to the Industrial Revolution, but it came at a heavy cost. The rapid urbanization of cities in the UK, such as London and Manchester, led to significant public health challenges. These cities grew around factories with large populations of workers living in densely packed neighborhoods, often without proper sanitation or clean water. So as the industrial city emerged, public health professionals were faced with overwhelming problems. The very basics of urban life, such as water, air, and housing, became problematic. So actually the list of issues was long. But first, water supplies were contaminated by industrial waste, leading to a lack of potable water. Then garbage and human waste were often dumped into streets and rivers, causing diseases to spread rapidly. Also, air pollution, especially smoke and smog from coal burning, choked the cities. Housing conditions were appalling. Public housing meant living in tenement buildings with inadequate light, air, or ventilation. So even burying the dead became a problem because cemeteries were full, and overcrowding led to unsanitary condition, even in death. So in response to these dire conditions, reformers such as Edwin Chadwick and other public health leaders pushed for sanitation reform. Chadwick is remembered for his role in creating the sanitation movement, and he initiated studies into the conditions of the poor, particularly factory workers. So his work of epidemiology in 1842 highlighted the link between poor living conditions and the spread of diseases like cholera. So um, this led to the rise of what we call the sanitarian profession, where leaders in both the local and national spheres campaigned against the horrors of epidemic diseases, dirty streets, and unhealthy housing. So in the mid 1800s, professionals argued about whether the cause of disease was filth or germs. So this debate referred to as the filth versus germ. Please note this. This is very important in the history of urban planning. The filth versus germ argument pitted public health and advocates like Benjamin Clark Marsh and John Snow against city planners, housing advocates, and those pushing for better sanitation systems. In this sense, public health and city planning began to take shape as separate yet intertwined disciplines, even focusing on improving the urban environment to protect the health and well-being of residents. So these efforts laid the groundwork for modern urban planning principles such as waste management, pollution control, and public housing reform. So, okay, please remember this part of history in the 19th century. So we can go to the next slide. Okay. Mm. So when we think of urban planning today, we envision carefully designed cities with open spaces, transport systems, and regulated housing. But this modern vision is rooted in a very reality from the past where poor living conditions and health crisis sparked the need for change. So the first steps towards modern planning were driven by a need to alleviate the worsening living conditions of the urban poor, particularly during the industrial era. Overcrowding in cities like London led to the spread of diseases like cholera. So John Snow, you can see there his picture, who traced the cholera outbreak to contaminated water, played a pivotal role in linking urban conditions to public health. One of the main objectives was to solve acute public health crisis by addressing the lack of sanitation services. So municipalities had to step up and provide clean water, sewage systems, and better housing to improve the overall well-being of city dwellers. This led to a growing interest in not only improving social conditions, but also enhancing urban design and aesthetics, making cities more livable, functional, and visually pleasing. But town planners weren't just concerned with beauty. They were equipping themselves with technical knowledge to address problems like traffic congestion, waste disposal, and housing density. So these early efforts are the foundation of the professional urban planning we know today. So I'd like also to go to Public Health Act of 1875 under England. So it was actually one of the significant milestones was this legislation by England, which laid out rules that divided countries or counties into sanitary districts, both urban and rural. So each district was placed under the supervision of central government authorities, making the start of a structured approach to managing health at the local level. This act made local authorities responsible for sanitary services, including water supply, drainage, and waste disposal. So another legislation was the UK Local Governments Act of 1888. So just imagine if you try to compare it with Philippines, that we only had the similar legislation in 1991, the RA 7160, Local Government Code of 1991. So and in the UK, they had it in 1888, which introduced formal land use regulations. It gave local boroughs and towns the authority to manage housing, regulate building standards, and establish minimum street widths and lavatory requirements for homes. So it's like the building code. Okay, so more importantly, it created back alleys for waste removal, a simple yet revolutionary concept that drastically improved sanitation in cities. So population density was also capped at 50 houses per hectare or per acre, sorry, or around 250 people to reduce overcrowding. So another legislation was the Town Planning Act of 1909. So the UK passed this as the efforts progressed, which was a huge leap forward because this act allowed local authorities to develop town plans, laying the groundwork for modern urban zoning regulations and the systematic development of cities. Around this time, conversations about city planning became more organized. In 1909, the first national conference on planning and congestion was held, highlighting the need to address urban sprawl and improve traffic flow in congested cities. Over in the US, the Public Health Association took a keen interest in city planning as early as 1872, understanding the close relationship between health and the urban environment. So if you will be asked in your board exam, which are the legitimate parents of modern planning? So modern town planning has several parents, areas of expertise that came together to form the foundation of this field, which include public health to address the sanitation crisis, another parent, sanitary engineering, which help develop clean water and sewage systems. Another is public housing, to ensure affordable, decent living spaces, social work, focusing on the well-being of urban populations, and finally, Baroque urban design, known for its wide open avenues and grand public spaces. So, one, two, three, five, right? So planning as we understand it today wasn't always about the built environment. Early town planning was more concerned with social welfare, ensuring that people who lived in these rapidly growing cities could do so in a safe, clean, and healthy environment. While aesthetics and design came later, it was the need for improved living conditions that gave birth to modern urban planning. So we can go to Ebenezer Howard. Next slide. um, so who was Sir Ebenezer Howard? In 1850 to 1928, he was the visionary behind the Garden City movement. He was an influential figure in urban planning, particularly through his groundbreaking concept of the Garden City. His ideas were revolutionary for addressing the urban challenges of his time, which still resonate today. And so what were his key works? And there were two books to speak of. In 1898, Howard published Tomorrow, and then there's the like a subtitle aside from To Tomorrow, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform, which was later republished in 1902. So after 4 years, as it became Garden Cities of Tomorrow. But in the board exam, if you're not able to see the subtitle, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform, and when you will be asked which book was published in 1898, and you are only seeing Tomorrow, and then Garden Cities of Tomorrow, and you have to choose just the word tomorrow, okay? Just the title Tomorrow, because sometimes they don't put the subtitle, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform. So this book laid the foundation for modern urban planning. In it, he argued that cities needed to be fundamentally restructured to address issues like overcrowding, poor sanitation, and abject living conditions. His solution was to change the physical form of cities, emphasizing the need to disperse populations and industries outside of city centers to ease congestion. And it also emphasized the need to create new sanitary living conditions, particularly important in the industrial era. And then emphasizing the need to design new cities that function well within a capitalist framework, ensuring they are both workable and livable. And he also advanced the concept of social city. So this was one of Howard's most forward-thinking ideas, the social city, which he developed after being inspired by the London World's Fair of 1851. The concept of social city was based on a polycentric model where instead of having one central city, multiple smaller cities would be connected, forming a cluster surrounded by a green belt. Okay, please remember um that concept. So the central city would house 58,000 people, and it would be surrounded by garden cities of around 30,000 people each. Okay? So this garden is just strengthen your imagination to understand better the characteristics of social city. These garden cities would be separated by permanent green spaces or farmland, creating a balance between urban living and nature. Also, there was a system of rails and roads that would link these cities with industrial hubs and nearby towns, ensuring access to resources like fresh food while maintaining a healthy environment. So Howard strongly believed in the importance of planning land use and city features beforehand. He wanted to avoid the common issue of uncontrolled organic urban growth, which often resulted in chaotic, overcrowded, and unhealthy living conditions. In his vision, city growth should be controlled and designed to ensure not only economic sustainability, but also the well-being of its residents. His concepts of green belts, self-contained communities, and planned cities continue to influence urban planners today, as seen in developments that prioritize sustainability and livability. So I would like you to linger a little on the slide of the social city concept so that um it would be very difficult to go back to this and understand again. So I always tell this from as far back as 2014 or 2015 batch. So it's the 10th year I'm doing this. So I hope you will appreciate the methodology. Okay, that the central city would house 58,000 people, and it would be surrounded by, that's the central city, okay, 58,000 people, and it would be surrounded by garden cities of around 30,000 people each. So it's a cluster, okay? And these garden cities that have 30,000 people each would be separated by permanent green spaces or farmland, creating a balance between urban living and nature. But wait, there's more. It's a system of rails and roads that would link these cities with industrial hubs and nearby towns, ensuring access to resources like fresh food while maintaining a healthy environment. So I hope you understood this social city concept so that we can go to the next slide, which is another thing that I would like you to appreciate and master, because it's very I when I spoke at the Clark City ISOCARP, that's the international conference held 2 weeks ago. Someone from, saan ba yun? Hindi naman Poland, but he was an international delegate, and he his research pertained to Ebenezer Howard's this one, Garden City concept, the particularly the three magnets. So let's see. Ebenezer Howard introduced the revolutionary Garden City concept, a planning model that aimed to combine the best elements of both city and countryside living. So that countryside means the rural area, all right? So Howard believed that neither the city nor the countryside offered a complete solution for the modern society of his time. Instead, he proposed a third model where the benefits of both urban and rural environments could be merged. So what are the three magnets that Howard spoke or emphasized in his Garden City concept? Central to Howard's concept is the idea of the three magnets, which he used to explain the advantages and disadvantages of both the city and the countryside. City, okay, the city offers jobs, culture, and services, but at the cost of a poor natural environment, pollution, overcrowding, and high living costs, while the countryside provides a clean, natural environment and affordable living, but lacks job opportunities, service, and amenities. Then the other magnet, town country, meaning Okay, it's a combination that Howard's third magnet, the town country, envisioned a solution combining the benefits of both. Okay, it would feature the employment, services, and social advantages of the city with the space, fresh air, and tranquility of the countryside. So the town country which he offered was a combination of the city and the countryside, which he called town country magnet, or yeah, the third magnet. The okay, Howard's Garden City was designed to accommodate 32,000 people. Okay, please note again the stats. Um, Howard, or the model or the characteristics. Okay, Howard's Garden City was designed to accommodate 32,000 people on 6,000 acres of land. It featured a series of self-contained satellite cities surrounded by a green belt of agricultural land. The diagram, which you see there on the right, showcases Howard's urban layout. So the central city, again, would be linked to the surrounding garden cities, okay, by a network of roads and railways ensuring connectivity and mobility, okay? So the garden cities would have residential, commercial, and industrial zones with public parks and shared spaces woven throughout, ensuring a balance between built environments and natural landscapes. So this plan ensured the sustainable growth of cities with careful planning of land use and population density, preventing the urban sprawl and uncontrolled growth seen in industrial cities of that time. Now, the garden city idea allowed people to enjoy the opportunities of the city, such as employment, culture, and services, and also the benefits of the countryside, open spaces, clean air, and a healthier lifestyle. So by planning cities with foresight, Howard believed societies could avoid the extremes of both overcrowded, polluted cities and isolated, underdeveloped rural areas. So Howard's Garden City model has left a lasting legacy on urban planning, influencing many modern developments focused on sustainability, livability, and balance between nature and urbanization. So we can go to the next slide. Still the key features of the Garden City to make sure that we are understanding them. The Garden City model introduced, okay, by Howard was more than just a theoretical exercise. It was a practical proposal to address the challenges of urban living during the Industrial Revolution. His vision incorporated the idea of decentralization, promoting balanced growth by combining the best of both of these rural and urban environments. Population, again, the ideal garden city would be home to approximately 30,000 residents. This population size was chosen to maintain a manageable and sustainable community, ensuring the benefits of social interaction without the downsides of overcrowding. The area there is 1,000 acres, equivalent to okay, someone, yeah, I think 405 hectares. So it would cover this one. Okay, can you imagine 405 hectares? This spatial distribution was sufficient according to Howard. It was sufficient to support a self-contained community with adequate room for residential areas, green spaces, and agricultural lands. So, third feature is agricultural green belt, because he said, surrounding the city would be an agricultural green belt of about 5,000 hectares or acres, sorry. So you multiply that 5,000 acres kasi kanina yung 1,000 is 405 hectares. So you can just multiply that to 405 to get the 5,000 acres. So this green belt is a critical element in Howard's design. So by this time, you need to be memorizing this already because it would be very difficult to be going back to history once we go to processes and once we go to plan implementation, legal aspects, and then ano pa ba? So there are much more to, memorize, be familiar with, understand. So this one, you need to get a lot of memory work at this very early time. You have 1 year, right? So at this very early time, you already have to be parang kabisado nyo na siya. Parang nilalaro nyo na lang. Ganon. Like memory work. Okay? So, the memory work, but still imagining how it looks like in your mind. So, this agricultural green belt, by the way, ensure that the city remained compact and did not sprawl uncontrollably. So, okay, imagine all the uh, characteristics. And it also provide local food production to sustain the city's population. Please don't forget this characteristic. And it offers space for recreation and maintain the connection between urban living and nature. So also, Garden City also would feature a high residential density of 15 houses per acre or 37 houses per hectare. Okay. This allowed for compact living while preserving sufficient open space for gardens and community facilities. Howard's design included distinct industrial and commercial zones. Why distinct? Yeah, it should be separated from residential areas by green belts. This arrangement minimized the negative effects of industrial pollution and noise while maintaining access to jobs and services. Another key feature was the rapid transport systems connecting the Garden City to the central city via railroads. Okay, because it should be a system of rails and roads. Remember, that was the first one description, and now I'm putting more detail. And this ensured an easy access to larger cities while preserving the self-sufficient nature of the Garden City. The city would grow outward. Another one is concentric layout. The city would grow outward in concentric rings with the central cities surrounded by residential areas, green belts, and industrial zones. So as towns grew, they would do so in a cellular pattern, forming a network of garden cities connected by rail and road, preventing urban sprawl. Quite easy to imagine, right? Quite easy. So what are the objectives of Garden City? It aimed to provide steady employment for residents through well-planned industrial zones and local job opportunities. By separating land for agriculture, okay, residential and industrial purposes, Howard sought to minimize conflicts and make land use more efficient. So that's one of the objectives of the Garden City is to reduce land use conflicts because you are separating that. Like what we have today, like at the traditional zoning we do today. And also Garden cities would offer a healthier living environment. And why? Because compared to congested urban centers, it is with more green spaces, better air quality, and access to nature. Also, Howard envisioned a city where comfort and convenience were central to everyday life, with well-planned public services, transportation, and community facilities. So Howard's Garden City concept was revolutionary for its time and had a lasting impact on urban planning. Many elements, such as zoning, green belts, and planned expansion, have become standard features in city planning today. So his emphasis on balancing economic, social, and environmental needs still resonates in modern urban development projects, aiming for sustainable and livable communities. So we go still, Ebenezer Howard, ang dami pala nitong Ebenezer Howard. So, um, and of course, because he inspired a generation of architects and urban planners who sought to implement his revolutionary ideas in real-world setting. It did not remain theoretical. It became a practical and influential movement in urban design, shaping cities not only in Britain but also across the world. And he is so they call themselves disciples during that time. So Barry Parker, okay, Barry Parker, Sir Frederick Osborne, and Raymond Unwin were among the most notable disciples of Ebenezer Howard. Please remember these people because it will sometimes they ask this when it's a movement, then it means that there were disciples, there were followers after the main proponent or after the one who established that concept. So on top is Ebenezer Howard, and then there were key disciples, namely Barry Parker, Sir Frederick Osborne, and Raymond Unwin. They were among those disciples, and they played a pivotal role in translating Howard's vision into reality. Because probably during the time of um, Howard, they were mostly theoretical than practical, or they were mostly theoretical than because turning it to coming to fruition means that yeah, it means funds, greater support, but probably most of those were already, you know, applied by these disciples. And that's why Parker, like for example, Parker and Unwin, both architects, worked together to create some of the first garden cities. So sila na yung nagpatuloy. And in 1902 to 03, Sir Raymond Unwin designed Letchworth Garden City, located 35 miles or 56 kms north of London. All right. Letchworth was a groundbreaking project and served as a practical application of Howard's principles. Okay, please remember it was Unwin. Unwin's work there from 1903 to 1920, quite long, right? 17 years, laid the foundation for the modern garden city movement. And then another iconic development was a garden city called the Welwyn Garden City. Okay, designed by Louis de Soissons. De Soissons took charge of the design in 1920 and it continued through 1934. So 14 years. So Welwyn followed Howard's ideals, emphasizing green spaces, mixed-use areas, and a well-thought-out urban layout that prioritize both social and environment considerations. So that's Welwyn by Louis de Soissons. That one, Letchworth, was Raymond Unwin. And then the Garden City principles influenced the development of 30 new towns across the UK after World War II. Okay, if history when you were younger, probably history would be so boring, but we cannot do anything. We don't have any choice but to be happy listening to history, right? So and to be fun about this history. Really a lot to remember in preparation for board exam, but yeah, you try your best to increase appreciation and increase interest uh on this. Yeah, I'll try my best to be to let this history and theory be more engaging than what you had in the past, probably in your master's program if you've done that. I'm not sure if you've done some history and theory in your master's program, or probably, but I'm sure in the architecture field they've done a lot of history and theory. So I'll what I will be doing is to treat everyone like wala pa, parang ganun. So I'll try to be more literal. I'll try to be more, comprehensive about history and theory. So, okay, 30 towns across the UK after World War II. These towns were initiated by the British government to accommodate the population surge and provide well-planned communities. Some notable examples of these new towns include Stevenage and the Hertfordshire. So the last and largest of these towns was Milton Keynes, located in Buckinghamshire. Milton Keynes in particular stands as a testament to the lasting influence of Howard's Garden City model, incorporating Greenbelt strategic zoning and a focus on both residential and industrial sectors. The Garden City movement was not limited to the UK because in Germany, the ideas were adopted by Hermann Muthesius and Bruno Todt, two influential German architects. They designed Germany's first garden city, Helero in 1909, located near Dresden, Helero was a manifestation of Howard's concepts of the European continent, demonstrating how his vision could transcend national boundaries. So Helero remains an example of the Garden City movement's reach and impact. So the legacy of Ebenezer Howard's Garden City movement continues to influence modern urban planning. The work of architects like Anwin de Soissons and Mutisius demonstrated the adaptability and power of Howard's ideas through the creation of new towns and cities designed with the principles of green belts, self-sufficiency, and harmonious land use. Howard's movement provided a blueprint for sustainable and livable communities. We go to the next slide. Okay, so in the early, yeah, I mentioned about Letchworth, Hertfordshire. In the early, you can see this, not really clear. In the early 20th century, Letchworth became a living embodiment of Ebenezer Howard's revolutionary concept of Garden City. Letchworth, located in Hertfordshire, UK, was the first garden city ever created. So it was the practical realization of Ebenezer Howard's idea I mentioned earlier. So Howard's vision outlined in his books Tomorrow in 1898 and Garden Cities of Tomorrow 1902, right? So was to resolve the poor living conditions in overcrowded industrial cities by creating new planned communities that offered open spaces, fresh air, and access to nature, while also maintaining urban conveniences and industry. So the design of Letchworth was entrusted to Sir Raymond Unwin. I mentioned also he was a disciple of Howard's Garden City principles. Along with his colleague Barry Parker, they took up the challenge of translating Howard's theoretical ideas into functional and sustainable urban layout. So the goal was to create a self-contained town that adhered to Howard's principle of what? The three magnets: town, country, and town country. The key idea was to offer the best of both worlds, the social opportunities and jobs of a cities combined with the health and tranquility of the countryside. So, what else? Bird Hill. So, nakikita nyo yun, cottages at Bird's Hill, in Letchworth. Then you can also see shops in the wind at Letchworth. Okay. Anyway, I'll not explain this anymore. So and when can we go to the next slide? Because Wellwyn Garden, that's another is another disciple of Howard by the name of Louis de Saison. Actually, you pronounce that because he's like French or song but of course we yeah, founded in yeah, the Wellwyn Garden City represents the continuation, okay, of the Garden City movement's principles, while that Schwartz was the first experimental model. Well, predecessors design and social organizations. So Louis de Soissons, a highly regarded architect and planner, was appointed as the chief architect and town planner for Wellwyn. Can you hear me? It says my internet is unstable. Can you hear me still? Narinig ko na
Yes,
ako.
ma'am.
Hello?
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes po, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Louis de Soissons, a highly regarded architect and planner, he was appointed the chief architect and town planner for Wellwyn. His task was to bring Howard's vision to life while adding a modern architectural flair. You see the um, well-manicured landscape there. So, the Soissons introduced a classical approach to urban planning with wide boulevards, formal layouts, and extensive green spaces. He carefully designed the layout to balance residential, commercial, and industrial areas while maintaining ample greenbelt zones. So you can see geometric designs and symmetry in the layout were essential elements, making Wellwyn feel organized and aesthetically pleasing. This structured approach not only made the city efficient in terms of transportation and land use, but also visually appealing. The hallmark of Wellwyn is its lush green landscapes. The Saison was mindful of Howard's vision for cities that integrated nature seamlessly into the urban environment. So the result is an abundant network of parks, gardens, and tree-lined streets that contribute to the residents' well-being. Green areas are not just for aesthetic purposes, but are functional spaces for community interaction and recreational activities that reflected Garden City's movement's emphasis on social health and quality of life. He also followed the principles of zoning with a clear division of spaces for residential areas, industry, and commerce. So the division ensures that each sector functions independently while contributing to the city overall cohesion. Uh, and I should not, yeah, I need to say that public transportation was also a significant consideration in Wellwyn's design, with train services providing rapid access to London and other nearby areas. So this accessibility helped maintain the balance between urban employment and rural tranquility. So we can go to the next slide. Not really, yeah, it's just a one shot here. So this Hampstead Garden City is located in the northern part of London. It was one of the earliest attempts to apply the Garden City principles to an urban setting inspired by Ebenezer Howard's Garden City movement. Hampstead aimed to combine the benefits of both city life and rural living in a harmonious environment. So you can see how Hampstead successfully integrates housing within a framework of green spaces and tree-lined streets. The emphasis on open spaces was designed to ensure that residents had access to nature even within an urban environment. So that was the goal there. Also, one of Hampstead's most notable contributions to urban planning was its zoning regulations, which carefully divided the city into areas designated for different uses. So architectural styles in Hampstead reflect both traditional and modern influences, making it a unique blend of past and present. So we can go to the next one. So it's just a map anyway that yeah, showing the two earliest examples of garden cities inspired by Howard. And so you can see Welwyn, Letchworth, Welwyn, and both cities remain living examples of the garden city movement, combining the ideas of urban living with access to nature. And they have influenced modern town planning by promoting a balanced and sustainable approach to urban environment. Go to the next slide. So the map depicts London and its green belt, highlighting the boroughs of London and the surrounding green areas. The concept of the green belt was designed to control urban sprawl by maintaining an area of open land around cities. So the primary goal of London's green belt is to preserve natural landscapes, limit urban expansion, and ensure a buffer zone between London and surrounding towns. And it also aims to protect the countryside and provides residents with access to green spaces, so, which are crucial for recreation, conservation, maintaining ecological balance. So the Green Belt was first established in the mid-2020s or mid-20th century as part of post-war town planning to combat overcrowded cities and ensure planned growth. It encourage also the regeneration of previously developed lands within the city rather than expanding outward into new areas. So okay, go to the next one. I think yeah, just a map again there that demonstrates London's green belt also that served as a testament to the success of Ebenezer Howard's Garden City movement that was envisioned to prevent uncontrolled urban sprawl. So then go to the next line. So I'd like to introduce the City Beautiful movement. So please be patient. This is just short, okay? The City Beautiful movement was an influential urban design and planning movement that began in the 1800s and lasted until the mid-20th century. It focused on enhancing the aesthetics of cities by emphasizing grandeur, monumentality, and symmetry, promoting beauty in urban spaces. So the movement emphasized the importance of beauty in the planning design. Okay, the with wide boulevards, large public parks and promenades, often featuring clusters of iconic civic buildings such as courthouses, city halls. Do you know that one? The bulky or the large columns and all this like of a museum, opera houses, and many more. And let's see for to the next through to the next page, Jen. That uh yeah, you can see here City Beautiful movement from 1800s to 1950s. It shows the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. Baka tanongin nito. So that was held in Jackson Park, Chicago, and is often credited with significantly strengthening the City Beautiful movement. So it was called the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. Um, it was held to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' arrival in the New World. The event drew attention for its grand architectural design and urban planning. So the exposition was designed as a temporary wonderland, like by leading architects of the time, featuring shimmering lagoons, monumental palaces, and classical architectural styles that invoke the grandeur of classical Greece, imperial Rome, and Bourbon Paris. So these aesthetics focus align perfectly with the City Beautiful movement's ideals of beauty, monumentality, and symmetry. So the layout of the exposition featured iconic structures such as the Palace of Fine Arts and the Grand Basin. These served as central focal points for the exhibition, displaying not only the artistic works, but also embodying the City Beautiful ideals of urban beauty and civic pride. So the Court of Honor became a symbol of civic virtue, representing how public buildings and spaces could inspire and uplift citizens. As described by historian Mel Scott, the exposition was an enthralling amalgam of influences from different cultures and eras, representing a unified vision of urban beauty that transcended national boundaries. This blend of artistic influences provided a model for future city planning in the US. So the success of the Columbian Exposition reinforced the City Beautiful movement's principles, showing that well-designed public spaces and monumental structures could transform cities, fostering a sense of pride and community among citizens. This paved the way for similar efforts in cities across the country, influencing urban planners to incorporate aesthetics into their designs. Overall, the Chicago World's Fair was a defining moment for the City Beautiful movement, demonstrating how careful attention to urban design and aesthetics could create a harmonious and inspiring city environment. So to the next slide. Okay, to the next slide. Nawala, ano? Sorry. We're still recovering from, a very slow internet. Uh, um, ah, Doon sa, i-ano mo, back mo? Okay, back ka. Sige pa. Let's see. Parang ako yata yung nawala. Wait lang. Okay. Um, sige pa. Yun sa, ano ba yun? Wait lang. Back pa. Back. Yay. Wala ulit. Okay. So that one. Okay. Beautiful movement. That flourished between 1890 and 1950s was primarily focused and the development of public spaces that inspired civic pride. And so, uh, the core elements of the city beautiful movement. First, sanitary design, civic spirit. So internet connection is unstable, so we need to improve tomorrow. But anyway, a few slides that we need to finish. In the US, okay. The movement shaped the designs of major cities such as Chicago in 1909, San Francisco. So it encouraged the beautification of city centers, which included wide boulevards and civic buildings. So choppy na ba? Choppy? Choppy pa din, Jen? Hmm? Choppy pa din ako. Hello? Choppy?
Okay na
Or,
po, ma'am.
ay, okay na. Few slides na lang, okay? Just to finish the City Beautiful movement. So, yeah, this movement shaped the identity of cities by creating spaces that reflected all those characteristics that I mentioned earlier: grandeur, civic pride, beauty. So, we can go to the next one. So just to emphasize, okay, just to emphasize, the Daniel Barnham here from 1846 to 1912. He was often recognized as a visionary in American city planning and a leading figure of the City Beautiful movement. So madami sila within this movement, but he was the leading figure, like like Howard in the Garden City movement. So ito naman si Burnham. So his influence can be seen in cities across the world with a planning legacy that emphasized beauty, order, and grandeur. He was the co-designer of the World's Columbian Exposition that I showed you earlier. uh, uh, Barnum, along with Frederick Law Olmsted, created the master plan for this pivotal event in Chicago. So the exposition's neoclassical architecture style and urban design drew millions of visitors and highlighted the importance of urban planning. It was instrumental in sparking widespread interest in the City Beautiful movement, which sought to transform American cities through beautification, and monumental public works. Please don't forget that he was the father of American city planning. Barnum's work laid the foundation for urban planning in the US. His approach, which combined aesthetics with functionality, pushed cities to create comprehensive plans that addressed not just infrastructure, but also civic beauty and public spaces. So, um, plan for Chicago. So that was among his no achievement actually. This plan aimed to make a design for beauty and efficiency. So his vision was for a city defined by grandeur and harmony. And then another notable project GAP from 1909 to 1956. It was a more comprehensive follow-up that looked at the entire Chicago metropolitan area. Then, of course, adopting the principles of City Beautiful to local context. So, Barnum favored Baroque aesthetics. What are the characteristics of Baroque aesthetics? His designs featured bold, dramatic structures that would become central landmarks. And then symmetry and cohesiveness because he aimed to create a unified urban landscape where buildings and streets followed a clear harmonious pattern. So exuberance and drama as among the characteristics because his projects often incorporated large public spaces and imposing civic buildings to inspire awe and civic pride. So while Barnum's vision for Chicago was admired for its ambition, it faced criticisms also. Uh, co- um, to include uh elite like an elitist vision because the plan was criticized for being designed as an aristocratic city for merchant prince, like catering only to the wealthy and neglecting the need of the working class. Another criticism is the lack of attention to real estate. Development trends led to overbuilding in some areas, contributing to congestion because it's bulky, right? So it's huge. And then commercial convenience. The plans focus on aesthetics over practicality led to insufficient provisions for business expansion in the rest of the cities. So, okay, uh, the I think the last, okay, we go to the last. Uh, um, for the next what did Uh, I think it's a very meaningful one. Because that was the fame and probably themselves will not be realized. Make remembering that a noble logic reflects Barnum believed in the power of large where he sought to create cities of beauty, grandeur, and purpose. He emphasized the importance of aiming high, not just in physical planning, but in the underlying hope and work that would drive scale that would outlast their own lifetime. He stressed the idea that every citizen should be within walking distance of ability and public welfare. he's very functionally or functional quality of life for all citizens. So I end this discussion at this lecture so that tomorrow we can tackle. Oh, sorry. Uh, yeah, you need to show Barnham's plan for Manila, Jen. Can you advance that to Manila? Okay. Um, because Manila, yeah, that in the early 1900s, Daniel Barnham, who had already established a reputation as the visionary behind Chicago's transformation, was commissioned to design the master plan for Manila. His plan reflected his beautiful ideals, blending aesthetics with functionality, aiming to establish Manila as a grand capital of the Philippines. So, what are those key features of Barnham's plan for Manila? Wide boulevards and monumental civic spaces, like the Luneta Park, right? Luneta Park. So, which was designed to be heart of civic life, and then a series of parks and green space that he recognized the importance of open space for public health and recreation. So his plan included multiple parks with Luneta as the primary civic space and secondary parks spread across. Barnham's plan extended to improve Manila's road network and waterfront, incorporating both beauty and utility. His idea was to create a city where commerce and recreation could coexist harmoniously. Also, because Barnham respected existing historical elements such as intramuros, while also proposing new areas for growth and modern development. So he planned to integrate old and new elements. So through many elements of Barnham's vision for Manila were not fully realized. His influence is still visible today, but you know the grand avenues, parks, and public spaces we see around Manila reflect Barnham's commitment to creating cities that are not only beautiful but also functional for the people who live in them. So I think that's all. Uh, so we can now have photo documentation, Jen. Thank you, and please remove screen sharing so that. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Let's continue tomorrow. Okay. Jen?
Okay, ready po. In 3, 2, 1.
Bye.
Okay, thank you everyone. Good night po.
Good night. Bye, everyone.